Welcome to the darkest corners of the internet, where fear takes form and nightmares come alive. If you crave spine-chilling tales and haunting mysteries, you've found your new home. Before we dive into today's terrifying story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Don't forget to like this video if it sends shivers down your spine, and share it with your bravest friends, if they dare. We'd love to hear your thoughts or theories in the comments below, so don't hold back. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. Let's begin.
I've always loved driving at night. There's something peaceful about the empty roads, the soft glow of the dashboard, and the gentle hum of the engine. Tonight was no different as I cruised down Highway 16, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The radio played softly in the background, some late-night talk show discussing the latest celebrity gossip. I chuckled to myself, wondering who actually cared about such trivial matters. As I rounded a bend, my eyes caught a flicker of movement on the roadside. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but as I drew closer, I realized it was a person. A hitchhiker, thumb outstretched, standing motionless in the gloom. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake pedal. It was late, and I knew better than to pick up strangers, but something about the figure's stance made me slow down. As I pulled over, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to make a terrible mistake. The hitchhiker approached my car, their features hidden beneath a heavy hood. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. A pale hand emerged from the folds of the jacket, pointing down the road. Just a few miles ahead, came a whisper barely audible over the idling engine. I nodded, reaching across to unlock the passenger door. As the figure slid into the seat beside me, a chill ran down my spine. The interior light flickered, casting strange shadows across my new companion's face. For a moment I thought I saw something inhuman, but when I blinked it was gone. "Thanks for stopping," the hitchhiker said, their voice a little stronger now. "Not many people would." I forced a smile and pulled back onto the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The radio crackled with static, the talk show replaced by an eerie silence. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into the side of my skull. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I cleared my throat. "So, what brings you out here so late?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The hitchhiker turned to face me and I felt a chill run through my body. "I'm always out here," they replied, their voice oddly flat. "Every night, waiting for someone to stop." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "That must be lonely," I managed to say. A soft laugh came from beside me, devoid of any real mirth. "Oh, I'm never truly alone," the hitchhiker said. "There are always others." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. What did they mean by others? As if in response to my unspoken question, I caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw shadowy figures in the backseat. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just the empty road behind us, stretching into the darkness. As we continued down the highway, I noticed a change in the landscape. The familiar landmarks I expected to see were nowhere in sight. Instead, the road was flanked by dense, dark forests that seemed to press in on us from all sides. "I think we might have taken a wrong turn," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The hitchhiker remained silent, staring straight ahead. I reached for my phone to check the GPS, but the screen was black. Dead battery. Perfect. Just then, a sign loomed out of the darkness, "Detour ahead." My heart sank as I realized I had no choice but to follow it. The new road was narrower, winding through the trees like a serpent. The hitchhiker stirred beside me, leaning forward slightly. "We're getting close now," they whispered, a note of anticipation in their voice. "Close to what?" I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. The trees seemed to lean in over the road, their branches scraping against the roof of the car. I had the unsettling feeling that we were being herded towards something. Something waiting for us in the heart of this strange, dark forest. The detour led us deeper into the woods until we came upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated house, its windows dark and empty. "Stop here," the hitchhiker said, their voice suddenly commanding. I found myself obeying without question, pulling up in front of the decaying porch. As I cut the engine, an eerie silence fell over us. The hitchhiker turned to me, and for the first time I got a clear look at their face. What I saw made my blood run cold. Their eyes were completely black, like pools of oil in the pale oval of their face. "We're here," they said, a smile spreading across their lips to reveal sharp, pointed teeth. I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. The hitchhiker's laugh filled the car, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't you want to come inside?" they asked, gesturing towards the house. "They're all waiting for you." As if on cue, lights flickered to life in the windows of the house. And in each one, I could see faces pressed against the glass, watching us. Waiting. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the house, unable to look away from the faces in the windows. They were pale, almost translucent, with the same black eyes as my passenger. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The hitchhiker's smile widened. "Lost souls," they replied. "Just like you." I shook my head, trying to deny their words. "I'm not lost," I insisted. "I just took a wrong turn." The hitchhiker laughed again, the sound echoing unnaturally in the confined space of the car. "We all take wrong turns," they said. "That's how we end up here." They reached out, their cold fingers brushing against my arm. "Come inside. Join us. You'll never have to be alone again." Despite my fear, I felt a strange pull towards the house. A part of me wanted to accept their invitation, to step into that dark doorway and leave everything behind. But another part, the part that was still clinging to life and sanity, screamed at me to run. In a burst of desperate energy, I threw myself against the car door. To my surprise, it swung open easily and I tumbled out onto the damp grass. The hitchhiker made no move to stop me, watching with those bottomless black eyes as I scrambled to my feet. "You can't run from us," they called as I sprinted towards the trees. "We're everywhere." I ignored their words, focusing only on putting as much distance between myself and that horrifying house as possible. The forest was dark and dense, branches whipping at my face as I ran. I could hear something moving in the undergrowth around me, keeping pace with my frantic flight. Voices whispered from the shadows, calling my name, begging me to stop. But beneath those honeyed words, I heard a hunger that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but managed to keep my footing. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. How long had I been running? Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have lost all meaning in this nightmare forest. Suddenly, I burst out of the trees onto a road. For a moment, hope surged through me. But as I looked around, my heart sank. It was the same road, the same house. I had run in a circle. And there, standing on the porch, was the hitchhiker, waiting for me, smiling that terrible, sharp-toothed smile. "Welcome back," they said. "We knew you'd return." I fell to my knees, exhausted and defeated. The hitchhiker approached, their movements unnaturally fluid. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped, looking up at them through sweat-stained eyes. They crouched down beside me, their black eyes reflecting the starlight. "Because it's what we do," they said simply. "We gather the lost, the lonely, the forgotten. We give them a home." They gestured towards the house, where the pale faces still watched from the windows. "Look closely," the hitchhiker urged. "Don't you recognize them?" I squinted, focusing on the nearest window. The face there seemed familiar somehow. With a jolt of horror, I realized why. It was the face of a missing person I'd seen on the news months ago. My gaze darted from window to window. More familiar faces. More missing people. "What are you?" I whispered, though I feared I already knew the answer. The hitchhiker's smile widened, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "We are the collectors of souls," they hissed. "And you, my friend, are our newest acquisition." The hitchhiker extended a hand towards me, their pale skin almost glowing in the darkness. "You have a choice," they said, their voice suddenly gentle. "You can join us willingly, become part of our family. Or..." They trailed off, their eyes flicking towards the forest where shadowy figures lurked. I understood the unspoken threat: join them or be taken by force. I looked back at the house, at the faces in the windows. They no longer seemed menacing. Instead, I saw a deep sadness in their eyes, a longing for something they had lost. "What happens if I join you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The hitchhiker's expression softened. "You'll never be alone again," they promised. "You'll be part of something greater than yourself." I closed my eyes, thinking of my life before this night. The long, lonely drives. The empty apartment waiting for me. The friends who had drifted away over the years. When I opened my eyes again, I had made my decision. With shaking legs, I stood up. The hitchhiker's smile widened as they realized what I had chosen. They took my hand, their touch icy cold, and led me towards the house. As we approached, the door swung open of its own accord. Warm light spilled out, along with the sound of soft music and laughter. It was inviting, welcoming. Nothing like the terrifying place I had imagined. We paused on the threshold, and the hitchhiker turned to me. "Once you cross this line, there's no going back," they warned. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I took a deep breath, looking back at the dark forest and the road beyond. My old life. Then I turned back to the warmth and light of the house. My new family. "I'm sure," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The hitchhiker nodded, squeezing my hand. Together we stepped over the threshold. As we did, I felt a strange sensation, as if something essential was being pulled out of me. My fear, my loneliness, my humanity. The moment I entered the house, everything changed. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the air itself felt thick and heavy. The faces I had seen in the windows now surrounded me, smiling and welcoming. But their forms were shifting, changing into something else. I looked down at my own hands and gasped. My skin was turning pale, almost translucent. I could see the shadows of my bones beneath. "What's happening to me?" I asked, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. The hitchhiker, now revealed as some sort of ethereal being, placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're becoming one of us," they explained. "Shedding your mortal form to join the collective." I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. The loneliness and fear that had plagued me for so long were melting away, replaced by a feeling of belonging. As my transformation continued, I began to sense the thoughts and feelings of the others around me. We were becoming one, a unified consciousness bound together by our shared experience. As the last vestiges of my humanity slipped away, I found myself connected to a vast network of minds. The collective consciousness of all those who had come before me flooded into my awareness. Centuries of experiences, countless lives and deaths, all became part of me. I saw the true nature of the house and its inhabitants. We were guardians of a sort, collecting lost souls and giving them purpose. The hitchhiker, I realized, was just one of many forms we could take to draw in those who needed us. Through the eyes of the collective, I watched as another car approached on the distant highway. Another lost soul, another potential addition to our family. I felt a surge of excitement from the others. It was time to go to work. Without a word, we all knew our roles. Some would remain in the house, watching and waiting. Others would hide in the forest, hurting our guest if they tried to flee. And one of us would take on the role of the hitchhiker, standing by the roadside with a thumb outstretched. As I stood by the side of the road, thumb extended, I marveled at how different everything looked through my new eyes. The darkness held no terror for me now. Instead, it felt like a comforting blanket. I could sense the approach of the car long before I saw its headlights. The driver inside was tired, lonely, perfect for our purposes. As the car slowed to a stop beside me, I adopted the persona I had chosen for this encounter. A friendly smile, a hint of vulnerability in my voice. "Thanks for stopping," I said as I slid into the passenger seat. Not many people would. The driver, a middle-aged man with worry lines etched deep into his face, gave me a wary smile. "Where are you headed?" he asked. I pointed down the road towards where I knew the house was waiting. "Just a few miles ahead," I replied softly. As we drove off into the night, I felt the anticipation building in the collective consciousness. Soon we would have a new member in our family. As the car disappeared around a bend in the road, taking the unsuspecting driver towards his destiny, I found myself reflecting on my own journey. It hadn't been so long ago that I was in his position, afraid and alone on a dark highway. Now I was part of something greater, something eternal. The loneliness that had plagued me for so long was gone, replaced by the constant presence of the collective. We were the guardians of the lost, the shepherds of lonely souls. Some might see us as monsters, but we knew the truth. We offered salvation, a chance to belong. As I melted back into the shadows, preparing to return to the house, I sensed another car approaching in the distance. Another lost soul searching for meaning. Another chance to grow our family. The cycle would continue as it had for centuries and would for centuries more. And I, once a lonely traveler on a midnight drive, was now a part of that eternal dance. The hitchhiker, the house, the forest, we were one. And we would always be here, waiting for those who needed us most. The monotony of the long drive was starting to get to me. I'd been on the road for hours, making my way across the country for a job interview. To keep myself awake, I fiddled with the radio, searching for something interesting to listen to. Static crackled through the speakers as I turned the dial, snippets of music and voices fading in and out. Suddenly, a clear voice cut through the white noise. "Help me," it whispered, sending a chill down my spine. I blinked, sure I had imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time. "Please help me. I'm trapped." My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The voice sounded so real, so desperate. I glanced at my phone, considering calling for help, but who would believe me? As I debated what to do, the radio crackled again, and this time the voice said my name. I spun the dial frantically, trying to find a station that would drown out the eerie voice. But no matter where I tuned, it seemed to follow me. "Find me," it whispered. "I'm waiting for you." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the voice was giving me directions. "Turn left at the next intersection," it instructed. I hesitated, unsure if I should follow these mysterious commands. But something about the voice's urgency made me comply. As I turned onto the new road, the static cleared, and a song played smoothly for a few minutes. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But then the voice came back, its tone more insistent. "You're getting close," it said. "Don't stop now." I glanced around, but the landscape was unfamiliar. Where was I being led? The voice continued to guide me through the night, leading me down roads that seemed to grow progressively narrower and more isolated. I began to feel a sense of unease, as if I was being herded towards some unknown destination. The GPS on my phone refused to work, and the only sound was the voice on the radio, urging me forward. "Just a little farther," it promised. "You'll see." As I drove, the trees seemed to close in around me, casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness, but whenever I looked, there was no one there. The voice on the radio seemed to be my only companion now, its whispers growing more urgent by the minute. I wondered if I'd ever find my way back to civilization. The thought sent a wave of panic through me, but I pushed it aside. I had to see this through. As the night wore on, the voice led me into an abandoned town. The streets were empty, lined with crumbling buildings and overgrown gardens. It was as if time had forgotten this place. The voice fell silent, leaving me to navigate the desolate streets alone. I drove slowly, my headlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside my car. I spun around, but there was no one there. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once. I accelerated, racing through the empty streets until I reached the edge of town. There, I found a single building that seemed untouched by time, a small diner, its neon sign still buzzing with life. The voice on the radio spoke up once more. "Welcome home," it said. "You're exactly where you need to be." I pulled into the diner's parking lot, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. The building seemed out of place in this abandoned town, like a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. I stepped inside, and the bell above the door jangled loudly. The interior was surprisingly warm and inviting, with a counter that stretched along one wall and booths that seemed to have been recently polished. But there was no one in sight. I called out, "Hello?" but only my echo replied. I slid onto a stool at the counter, wondering if I should wait or leave. As I sat there, I noticed a piece of paper on the counter with a message scrawled on it, "They're waiting for you." Suddenly, the radio in my car crackled to life outside. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said. "Now you'll never leave." Just as I was starting to feel like I was truly alone, a figure emerged from the kitchen. She was a waitress, dressed in a classic diner uniform, her hair styled in a vintage bob. She moved with a quiet efficiency, pouring me a cup of coffee without a word. I watched her, mesmerized by the way she seemed to glide across the floor. "Thanks," I said, trying to break the silence. She smiled, but her eyes seemed distant, as if she was looking right through me. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she turned to leave, I noticed something odd. Her reflection wasn't in the mirror behind her. I spun around, wondering if I was seeing things, but she was still there, moving towards the kitchen. "Wait," I called out, but she didn't respond. The waitress returned with a plate of food, setting it down in front of me with a quiet efficiency. I stared at the meal, unsure if I should eat. But my stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten in hours. As I took my first bite, I noticed a piece of paper under the plate. It was a note, written in the same handwriting as the message on the counter. "Look closer," it said. "The truth is in the static." I looked up at the waitress, but she was gone. The diner was empty once more. I turned my attention to the radio in my car, wondering if there was more to the voice than I had initially thought. As I stepped outside, the voice spoke up again. "You're getting closer," it whispered. "But be warned, the truth is not what you expect." I sat back in my car, tuning the radio to different stations. At first, all I got was static. But then I started to pick up snippets of conversation. It sounded like a broadcast from an unknown station, discussing things that seemed impossible. They talked about parallel universes and alternate realities, about beings that existed beyond our understanding. The voice on the radio was part of this broadcast, guiding listeners through the multiverse. I felt my mind expanding, trying to comprehend the scale of what I was hearing. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. As I listened, the static began to clear, and I heard a name mentioned, a place called Erebus. It was said to be a nexus, a point where different realities converged, and I was being drawn towards it. With a newfound sense of purpose, I started the car and continued driving. The voice on the radio guided me through the night, leading me towards Erebus. The landscape around me began to change, becoming more surreal and dreamlike. I passed through towns that seemed to exist in multiple places at once, and roads that looped back on themselves. It was as if reality itself was bending to accommodate my journey. The voice on the radio remained my constant companion, urging me forward. "You're almost there," it promised. "Just a little farther." I felt a sense of excitement mixed with fear. What would I find at Erebus? And what lay beyond? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I saw it, a shimmering point on the horizon where the roads seemed to converge. Erebus. The voice on the radio fell silent, leaving me to approach the nexus alone. As I drew closer, I felt a strange energy building around me. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly power. I stepped out of the car, feeling the ground beneath my feet begin to shift. It was as if different realities were colliding, merging into a single point, and I was at the center of it all. Suddenly, figures began to emerge from the convergence. They were people I had seen before, the hitchhiker from the other night, the waitress from the diner. They were all here waiting for me. The figures closed in around me, their faces familiar yet strange. They seemed to be from different versions of reality, all drawn to this point. The hitchhiker spoke up, their voice echoing through the gathering. "We've been waiting for you," they said. "You're the key to unlocking the next phase." I looked around, trying to understand what was happening. The waitress stepped forward, her eyes no longer distant. "You've been chosen to navigate the multiverse," she explained, "to guide others through the static and into new realities." I felt a surge of power run through me, as if I was being imbued with a new purpose. But with it came a sense of responsibility. I was no longer just a traveler, I was a guide. As I stood there, surrounded by these beings from different realities, I began to see the multiverse in all its complexity. I realized that every decision, every choice created a new reality. And I was now a part of this vast network, a thread weaving through the fabric of existence. The voice on the radio spoke up once more, its tone different now. "You have the power to navigate the static," it said, "to find those who are lost and guide them home." I felt a sense of wonder and awe. I was no longer just a driver on a long road trip. I was a traveler through the multiverse. With my newfound understanding, I accepted my role as a guide. The figures around me nodded in approval, and the hitchhiker handed me a small device. "This will help you tune into the frequencies of those who need your help," they explained. I took it, feeling a sense of purpose I had never known before. As I looked out at the convergence of roads, I realized that my journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I would travel through realities, finding those who were lost and guiding them to safety. And with each journey, I would grow stronger, more attuned to the multiverse. My first mission was to find a soul trapped in a reality that was collapsing. The device in my hand beeped, guiding me towards the location. I set off, driving through landscapes that shifted and changed around me. The voice on the radio provided updates, helping me navigate the ever-changing terrain. As I approached the reality, I could feel its instability. The air was thick with an electric charge, and the sky was a deep, foreboding purple. I stepped out of the car, the device leading me to a figure standing at the edge of a cliff. They were staring out into the void, unaware of the danger closing in around them. I approached quietly, not wanting to startle them. "It's time to go," I said gently. "I'm here to help you." As I guided the lost soul back to safety, I couldn't help but reflect on my own journey. From a lonely driver on a midnight road trip to a guide through. My stomach growled as I drove through the night, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since lunch. The glowing sign of a 24-hour diner appeared in the distance like a beacon of hope. I sighed with relief, already tasting the greasy comfort food in my mind. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed how empty it was, just my car and an old pickup truck. The neon open sign buzzed invitingly, and I pushed open the glass door, a little bell announcing my arrival. The interior was like stepping back in time, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, and the smell of coffee and bacon in the air. A lone waitress stood behind the counter, her back to me. "Hello," I called out, sliding onto a stool. She turned slowly and I felt my blood run cold. Her face was blank, featureless, like a mannequin's. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the haze. When I opened them again, the waitress was still there, but her face had changed. It was no longer blank. Instead, it was a perfect replica of a 1950s diner waitress, bright smile, curly hair, and a friendly demeanor. "Welcome to Eddie's Diner," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "What can I get for you?" I ordered a burger and fries, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. As she worked, I noticed something odd. The diner seemed to be shifting around me. Booths moved, and the jukebox changed songs without anyone touching it. I glanced out the window, wondering if I was losing my mind. The pickup truck was gone, but a new car had appeared in its place, and it looked familiar. The waitress seemed to sense my gaze and turned to me with a curious expression. I stared at the car outside, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was the same model as the one I had seen in a news report about a missing person. The one that had been found abandoned on a deserted road. I turned back to the waitress, trying to ask her about it, but she was busy taking an order from a new customer. I blinked, surprised. There had been no one else in the diner when I arrived. Now the place was bustling with people. They all seemed normal, chatting and laughing, but there was something off about them. They didn't quite fit into the surroundings. As if they were actors in a play, trying to convince me of a reality that wasn't quite real. The waitress returned to me, her smile unwavering. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. As I waited for my food, I noticed that the customers were starting to disappear. One by one they would get up and walk out, but they wouldn't leave the diner. They would simply vanish into thin air. I watched, bewildered, as the diner emptied out. The waitress remained, polishing a mug with a white apron. "Your food is ready," she said, setting a plate in front of me. I stared at the burger, feeling a sense of unease. Something was very wrong here. I took a bite, and the flavors were perfect, just what I needed after a long drive. But as I chewed, I realized that I was alone in the diner. The waitress was gone, and the lights were flickering ominously. The air seemed to thicken, and I felt trapped. I pushed my plate away, feeling a chill run down my spine. The diner was empty, the only sound the hum of the neon sign outside. I stood up, deciding it was time to leave. But as I approached the door, I found it wouldn't budge. It was as if the diner was trapping me. I spun around, searching for another way out, but there were no other doors. Just the booths, the counter, and the jukebox, which was now playing a haunting melody. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see the waitress standing there, her face once again blank and featureless. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The diner seemed to be closing in around me, the shadows deepening into dark, menacing pools. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy as if rooted to the spot. The waitress began to move towards me, her pace slow and deliberate. I closed my eyes, hoping it was all just a dream. But when I opened them again, I was back in my car, parked outside the diner. The neon sign still buzzed above me, but everything else was different. The pickup truck was back and the diner seemed smaller. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was hallucinating. But as I looked closer, I realized that I was in a loop. Every time I entered the diner, the same events would unfold. And I couldn't escape. The thought sent a wave of panic through me. How could I break this cycle? As I sat in my car, trying to make sense of what was happening, I remembered a story my grandmother used to tell. About a place that existed outside of time, where events repeated themselves endlessly. She called it the Echo Place. I had always thought it was just a myth, but now I wasn't so sure. The diner seemed to be an echo, a place where moments from different timelines converged. And I was trapped in it. I started the car, deciding to drive away and break the cycle. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw the diner in my rearview mirror. It was still there waiting for me. The neon sign seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, drawing me back in. I drove to the nearest town, determined to find out more about the diner. At the local library, I dug through old newspapers and town records. There was no mention of Eddie's Diner, no sign that it had ever existed. But I found stories of people who had gone missing in the area, all of them last seen driving down the same stretch of road. I realized that the diner was a nexus, a point where different realities intersected. And it was drawing people in, trapping them in its loop. I felt a sense of determination. I had to find a way to escape, to break the cycle and free anyone else who might be trapped. The librarian watched me with a curious expression, as if she knew more than she was letting on. I returned to the diner, armed with a camera and a notebook. I was determined to document everything, to find a pattern that could help me escape. As I entered, the waitress greeted me with her usual smile. I ordered food, watching as the diner filled with people once more. This time I was prepared. I took photos and notes, trying to capture every detail. But as the loop began to repeat, I realized that my efforts were futile. The camera was empty, the notebook blank. It was as if the diner was erasing my attempts to understand it. I felt a surge of frustration, but I refused to give up. There had to be a way out. As I sat in my car once more, trapped in the loop, I had an epiphany. The diner wasn't just a physical place, it was a state of mind. It was a manifestation of my own fears and doubts. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell, about how the mind could create its own reality. I realized that I had the power to change this reality, to break the cycle. With newfound determination, I stepped out of the car and approached the diner. This time I was ready. I pushed open the door and the bell above it rang out. The waitress looked up, her expression unchanged. But I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition. I walked towards the waitress, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're not trapped," I said, my voice firm. "You're free." The diner around me began to shift and distort, like a reflection in rippling water. The waitress's face changed, becoming more defined. She looked human. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And with that, the diner began to fade away. The neon sign dimmed, and the building seemed to dissolve into the night. I stood there, feeling a sense of wonder and relief. I had broken the cycle. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure standing by the roadside, watching me. As the diner disappeared, I found myself back on the highway, the sun rising over the horizon. I was alone, but I felt a sense of peace. I realized that the diner had been a test, a challenge to confront my own fears and limitations. I started the car, feeling a sense of freedom. I was no longer trapped in the loop. I drove away, leaving the mystery of the diner behind. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure standing by the roadside, thumb outstretched. It was the hitchhiker from my previous journey, and they were watching me. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What did they want? I pulled over, feeling a sense of déjà vu. The hitchhiker approached my car, their face familiar yet strange. "You're one of us now," they said, their voice low and mysterious. "You've seen beyond the veil." I nodded, understanding. The diner, the radio voice, the hitchhiker, they were all part of a larger network, a web of interconnected realities, and I was now a part of it. The hitchhiker handed me a small device. "This will help you navigate the multiverse," they explained. "You're a guide now, just like the others." I took the device, feeling a sense of purpose. I was no longer just a driver on a road trip. I was a traveler through the multiverse. With the device in hand, I felt a sense of excitement mixed with fear. I was no longer just a driver on a road trip. I was a traveler through the multiverse. The hitchhiker nodded as if they could see the understanding in my eyes. "Your first mission is to find a soul trapped in a reality that's collapsing," they said. "You'll know it when you see it." And with that, they vanished, leaving me to my new journey. I started the car, feeling a thrill of anticipation. What lay ahead? And how would I navigate the ever-changing landscapes of the multiverse? I glanced at the device, ready to face whatever challenges came my way. As I drove into the unknown, I couldn't help but reflect on my journey. From a simple road trip to a journey through the multiverse, I had come a long way. The diner, once a place of fear and confusion, was now a memory, a reminder of the power of the mind to create and shape reality. I was no longer alone. I was part of a community of guides, navigating the complexities of the multiverse. And with each journey, I would grow stronger, more attuned to the infinite possibilities that lay beyond the veil of our mundane world. The road stretched out before me, a path into the unknown, and I was ready. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I was exactly where I needed to be. The multiverse was vast and mysterious, but I was no longer afraid. I was a part of it, a thread in its intricate tapestry. It had been a long day at the conference, and all I wanted was to get home to my own bed. The highway stretched out before me, dark and empty. I yawned, fighting off the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. To stay alert, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, watching the headlights of the occasional car behind me. That's when I first noticed it, a shadow that didn't quite match the rest of the darkness. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It seemed to move independently of the car's motion, shifting and stretching in impossible ways. I rubbed my eyes, blaming my tired mind for playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the shadow was closer, more defined. It almost looked like a face pressed against the back window. My heart raced as I pressed down on the accelerator, suddenly desperate to outrun whatever was following me. The shadow in the rearview mirror seemed to grow, filling more of the glass with each passing second. I could make out features now, hollow eyes, a gaping mouth, fingers reaching towards me. I swerved, hoping to shake it off, but it clung to my car like a second skin. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, knuckles white with fear. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It had to be a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. Something that defied explanation. As I watched, the shadow began to seep into the car, tendrils of darkness creeping along the edges of the seats. I pushed the car to its limits, speeding down the empty highway. The shadow kept pace effortlessly, its form rippling and changing with each mile. I searched desperately for an exit, a town, anything that might offer safety. But there was nothing but endless road and darkness. The radio crackled to life, playing static and fragments of voices. I could have sworn I heard my name whispered among the noise. The temperature in the car dropped suddenly, my breath fogging in the air. I felt a presence behind me, cold and ancient. In the rearview mirror, I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. They weren't human. They weren't anything I could comprehend. And they were getting closer. A sign for an upcoming rest stop appeared, and I took the exit without hesitation. Anything to get off this haunted highway. The rest stop was deserted, a single flickering streetlight illuminating the empty parking lot. I pulled in, killing the engine and sitting in silence for a moment. The shadow seemed to have disappeared, but I could still feel its presence. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs and trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I noticed the old map on the information board. It showed a network of back roads, a potential escape route. With shaking hands, I took a picture of the map with my phone. As I turned back to my car, I froze. The shadow was there, a dark silhouette against the streetlight, and it was walking towards me. I jumped back into my car, fumbling with the keys as I started the engine. The shadow was getting closer, its form becoming more solid with each step. I peeled out of the parking lot, following the route I had memorized from the map. The back roads were narrow and winding, barely visible in the darkness. I drove recklessly, taking turns at dangerous speeds. In my rearview mirror, I could see the shadow keeping pace, sometimes running alongside my car, sometimes flowing over it like a wave of darkness. The landscape around me began to change, becoming unfamiliar and distorted. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches reaching out like claws. The road itself seemed to shift and twist, leading me deeper into unknown territory. I realized with growing horror that I was no longer in control of my journey. The back roads led me to a small town that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. But as I drove through its empty streets, I realized something was wrong. The buildings were dilapidated, windows boarded up, streets overgrown. It looked like no one had lived here for decades. Yet there were cars parked along the curb, their paint fresh and gleaming. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In the rearview mirror, the shadow had taken on a new form. It now looked like a person walking calmly behind my car. I could make out details, a hat, a long coat, features that seemed to shift and change with each blink. As I watched, other shadows began to emerge from the abandoned buildings, joining the first. They moved in unison, a silent parade of darkness. In the center of the abandoned town, a single building showed signs of life. A diner, its neon sign buzzing in the night. I pulled into the parking lot, desperate for help or at least some answers. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed that the shadows had stopped at the edge of the lot. They stood there watching, waiting. I pushed open the diner door, a bell jingling overhead. Inside, it was like stepping back in time. The decor was pure 1950s, and the few patrons seated at the counter were dressed to match. They turned to look at me as I entered, their faces blank and expressionless. A waitress approached, her smile too wide, too fixed. "Welcome to Eddie's," she said. "We've been expecting you." I sat at the counter, my mind reeling. The waitress placed a cup of coffee in front of me without asking. "You've got questions," she said, her voice oddly flat. "We've got answers." I looked around the diner, at the frozen patrons, at the windows that showed nothing but inky blackness outside. "What is this place?" I asked. "Where am I?" The waitress's smile never faltered. "You're in between," she said. "This is a way station for lost souls." She gestured to the other patrons. "They're all like you, caught between realities." I felt a chill run down my spine. "And the shadows?" I asked. The waitress's eyes darkened. "They're the collectors," she said. "They bring souls here, and sometimes they take them away." The waitress leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You have a choice to make," she said. "You can stay here, safe from the shadows, or you can try to make it back to your own reality." I glanced out the window where the shadows still waited. "What happens if I stay?" I asked. The waitress's smile faded slightly. "You become like us," she said. "Frozen in time, neither here nor there." I looked at the other patrons, their blank faces and empty eyes. The thought of becoming like them filled me with dread. "And if I try to leave?" The waitress's expression turned grave. "You face the shadows," she said. "And if they catch you?" She trailed off, leaving the consequences unspoken. I made my decision. I couldn't stay here, trapped in this limbo. I had to try to get back home. The waitress nodded as if she had expected this. "There's a way out," she said, "but it's dangerous." She pulled out a map similar to the one I had seen at the rest stop. But this one showed impossible roads, twisting paths that seemed to defy physics. "Follow this route," she said. "If you can make it to the end, you'll find your way home." I studied the map, trying to memorize its convoluted paths. Outside, the shadows seemed to sense my intentions. They began to move, circling the diner like predators. I knew I had to act fast. With a deep breath, I stood up, ready to make my escape. I burst out of the diner, sprinting towards my car. The shadows surged forward, their forms stretching and distorting as they gave chase. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. Just as I got it open, I felt an icy touch on my shoulder. I spun around to see a shadow looming over me, its face a swirling void. With a cry of fear, I dove into the car and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching. In my rearview mirror, I saw the shadows flowing after me, a river of darkness flooding the streets. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, focusing on the impossible map in my mind. The first turn was coming up, a sharp left that seemed to bend reality itself. As I took the turn, the world around me began to change. The abandoned town melted away, replaced by a landscape that defied description. Roads twisted in the air like ribbons, looping and intersecting in impossible ways. The sky was a kaleidoscope of colors, shifting and pulsing with each passing second. I drove on, following the map's instructions as best I could. Behind me, the shadows continued their relentless pursuit. They flowed over and under the twisted roads, their forms adapting to the bizarre terrain. I pushed my car to its limits, taking turns that should have been physically impossible. With each maneuver, I felt reality bending around me. The shadows were falling behind, but I knew I couldn't let up. One wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, and they would have me. The end was in sight, a shimmering portal that I somehow knew would take me home. But the path to it was treacherous. The road narrowed to a thin strip, with nothingness on either side. The shadows were closing in, their howls of frustration echoing through the twisted landscape. I gritted my teeth and pressed down on the accelerator. The car shuddered as it raced along the narrow path, tires barely gripping the impossible surface. In the rearview mirror, I saw the shadows merge into one massive form, a tidal wave of darkness threatening to engulf me. The portal was so close now, its light almost blinding. With a final burst of speed, I aimed for the center of the shimmering gateway. The shadows lunged, their cold fingers brushing the back of my car. But it was too late for them. I felt a moment of weightlessness as my car leapt into the light. There was a flash of blinding light, and suddenly I was back on the highway. The familiar landscape of my world surrounded me, bathed in the soft light of dawn. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A faint shadow, barely visible, lingering at the edges of the glass. A reminder of the journey I had taken and the narrow escape I had made. I knew then that the world was stranger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And I knew that the shadows would always be there, waiting in the darkness, ready to pull unsuspecting travelers into their realm. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The world looked the same, but I saw it through new eyes. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every reflective surface a possible gateway to another reality. I knew I could never share my experience. Who would believe me? But the knowledge weighed heavily on me. I was a traveler between worlds now, marked by my encounter with the shadows. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced one last time at the rearview mirror. The shadow was gone, but I knew it wasn't the end. Somewhere out there, in the spaces between realities, the shadows were waiting. And I had a feeling our paths would cross again. For now, though, I was home. Safe, but forever changed by my journey through the night.